Hello, Gen Mess fans. I am so excited to announce that I'm adding a weekly newsletter called Dear Gen Mess as a companion to each episode. It's a place where I share with you a little behind the scenes about the guests and the topics of the podcast. There'll be links to resources that will help you get the most out of each episode and keep us connected week to week. So if you love the Gen Mess with Tess, you can sign up to be part of the Dear Gen Mess community by visiting tessbrigham.com/podcast.
Ever feel like different generations just don't get each other? Certified coach, licensed therapist, and speaker Tess Brigham tackles the generational challenges shaping our personal and professional lives on The Gen Mess with Tess.
Hello, and welcome to The Gen Mess with Tess, where we're not just fixing the mess, we're figuring out how to live in it. I'm your host, Tess Brigham, so let's start making sense of the mess together. So my guest today is Mimi Nicklin. She is a best-selling author and founder of Empathy Everywhere, a movement dedicated to the power of human connection. A global speaker who has shared stages with Bill Gates and Steve Wozniak, Mimi has reached over 5 million people worldwide. Her work, including the keynote, The Empathy Algorithm, trains senior leaders to leverage listening and empathy as the ultimate competitive advantages in an AI-driven era. Thank you so much for being here.
You're so welcome. Thank you for inviting me all the way across the world we are today.
Yes. And so before we dive into, because I have a lot of questions about empathy and lots of feelings about it, but I'm very, you worked, from what I read, you worked 16 years as a senior level executive, and then you pivoted to becoming an empathy advocate.
Yeah.
So I would love to hear the story of how do you get from there to where you are now?
Yeah, Tess, it was definitely not the plan, right? I never planned to be an author. I never planned to do any of this stuff. And I also love my work. So I think people seem to want like a really traumatic corporate world story that like led me to burnout or something, but that absolutely didn't happen. I had a phenomenal career. I was in advertising all over the world with big American businesses mainly, and I love that work. I love the world of creativity and communication. But in 2018, I took a role as a managing director for the region in Dubai, so in the Middle East. And I moved there and to take over, again, an American brand, a big American brand. It was the regional team. But when I got there to that business, let's say safely that the business was not quite as I expected it in terms of how it was performing. And the honest truth, Tess, was I had come from big jobs with senior vice president of blah, 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 with so many people around me, sales teams and finance teams and HR teams. And I found myself pretty much all alone in a very small sort of SME startup type business. And I was supposed to turn it around. And I had absolutely no idea how, right? Or at least I felt like I didn't know how. So at that point, I went to meet with a business coach to say, can you explain to me what on earth is going on in the city, right? And in that lunch date with her, she asked me about my leadership style. And I remember, Tess, I was talking about intuition. I was talking about being an intuitive leader. And she stopped me and she asked me a question, which in the end changed my life, because she said, Mimi, is it intuition? Or is it empathy? And I thought, no way. I mean, it's not empathy. What's empathy got to do with my work or leadership or the corporate world? But I left that lunch. I went away and started researching it. I discovered something called the empathy deficit, which is fundamentally the lack of human connection in our world. And then I never went back. I mean, I went back to work, but I never went back in my thoughts. When I found it, Tess, I couldn't believe that no one was talking about this, that this lack of understanding in our workplaces was growing and causing so many issues. And yet it wasn't a theme that was being spoken about. But luckily today, about 5 years later, that has changed.
Yes, and it makes me really happy to see and hear these stories because, this is stuff I've been shouting into the void for years that no one really cared. But one of the things that I'm so happy that our world is changing in this is that we're finally starting to see things like empathy, even into it. Like, these are not quote unquote soft skills. Yes, they're technically soft skills, but they are so, we don't value empathy. We don't put any value on it or learning it or understanding. I mean, at the core, there's like very little value put on taking a moment and trying to understand someone else's position. And it feels like the world that we live in today, it's getting better and better and better.
I think
But
so.
I don't know what you see, because I just feel like I get a lot of pushback from, people that are like, oh, empathy, I don't know. I want to be this tough leader, right? I want to be this kind of,
Yeah, I mean, I 100% resonate, but I agree with you as well that optimistically, this is definitely changing. I mean, even in the 5.5-ish years that I've been talking about this, like you, especially in the beginning, I just thought I was talking into the abyss, right? Like a black hole of silence. But today I get to meet people like you, do you know what I mean, from all across the planet, and you've found me and said, hey, why don't we have a conversation? So today there are more and more people that are open to this. It is definitely changing. There's not so much pushback. I think that the challenge is, I think there's two things. One is, as you said, this is not a soft skill. It's a hard skill, right? So it's hard to find. It's hard to maintain, and it has very hard business results. So we could talk about that if we want, but I mean, there's endless data that shows how beneficial this is to the bottom line, to the organization, including 21% higher profits for organizations that are led with empathy and 68% higher levels of engagement. It goes on, right? So first of all, this is definitely not a soft skill. It needs a bit of a revamp.
Yeah.
But the second part of that is that most people don't know what it is. So it is probably one of the most misunderstood leadership skills that we have, because most of the time when people are, you said people are pushing back on you, right? Most of the time that's because they think that actually what empathy is maybe sympathy, perhaps compassion, perhaps kindness. But the empathy itself is a cognitive reality, right? It sits in the prefrontal cortex of the brain. It is fundamentally the ability to understand others. Now, how are you going to lead anyone if you don't understand them? A big part of the work I do and having these conversations is making sure people understand this is a very functional cognitive skill set that elevates every performance driver you have. So really ignore it at your peril.
So I've read this in different places because, and I don't know if you've seen this as well, because I feel like sometimes there's different definitions of empathy. Like some people will be like, no, it's putting yourself in someone else's shoes. No, it's more like this. It's more like that. How do you define it?
So I would define it simply as perspective taking, the ability to take perspective from somebody else. So to understand what they're seeing, experiencing, or thinking in the same environment that you are, but perhaps differently. And your point, Tess, there are many definitions of it. I'm sure probably 100% of them are correct. But the reason that I keep it very simple is that we are so low on this skill set in the world. We do it so badly, right? In the last 30 years, we have lost 48% of our empathy. Now, when you realize that this is a skill set that keeps us alive, it's a pro-social skill set, right? As I said earlier, it's not about being nice. It's about cohesion of society. It's about our survival as a human race, right? That's why it's built into the brain. You begin to realize how dangerous it is when it starts to disappear. So therefore, for me and my work, I want to make this as simple and as easy to understand as possible, because we're failing at using it. So, of course, there are different types of empathy as well. You could learn about affective empathy and cognitive empathy and compassionate empathy, but we can't do any of them. So why complicate things with multiple when we can't even do the entry level yet? We're like at level 1. So yes, I think really what we're talking about is the ability to understand how somebody else sees things. And of course, that's the core to all leadership, because how can I drive performance if I don't know what drives you? How can I elevate well-being or inclusion or engagement if I don't know what is engaging to the people I'm leading? So we're talking about perspective taking at its core.
Yeah. No, it's so interesting too, because when I think about, if you work with a business coach, if you do branding work, the first thing everyone always asks you is, who's your ideal client? Like, what do they need to understand? Like, what does your client need to understand about the work that you do? Yes. And so we use this in so many different places, but we have a very hard time making the connection of, oh, wait a second. If I put myself in, if I tried to get the perspective of my new hire and maybe what it was like for them, and, people don't make that association, which is why I think it becomes like sort of seen as this soft skill. It's like, no, this is a skill that's very much integrated into so much of how we relate to each other. Yeah. The other thing that's interesting, I had never heard that stat before, about 48% less empathetic. And what I think is interesting is that we live in a world now where the depths of what people are going through is right in our faces. Right? That was one of the issues with is always been, right? If people have issues with other cultures and people in bias, it comes from not knowing, right? From not having the full picture. So we live in this world now where we see everything. We see what people are going through. So it's very I'm surprised, but not surprised that 48% we feel less, there's less empathy in the world. It should be the opposite, right? I mean,
you would think so. Yes. Yeah. You would think that the more connected you are on social and all these things, the easier that would be. But
the more you see,
the sort of shadow, I guess, of that always on connection and just the state of our world at large is it's a very scary place. It's a very stressful place, right? So we've never had more stress in our lives than we do today, at least perceived. And what we know about the brain and just how the brain works is that as stress goes up, because of the fight or flight response, the way the brain responds to stress, is that when you, as a human, when you experience stress, when you experience fear of some level, and often that fear, Tess, is subconscious. It's not like I'm scared of a monster, right? Or I'm scared of the edge of a cliff, right? These are subconscious fears, discomfort. That could be because of economic decline or war or stress in the workplace, right? But whenever your brain is under that stress and feels fear, it releases hormones into the body to help you overcome that, right? So things like adrenaline and cortisol, so that you can survive, right? The brain is trying to protect you. But when those hormones are in the bloodstream, what that tells the brain and the body is not, you should sit down and write a strategy, right? You should sit down and do cognitive parts of your brain. No, it tells you, you must do what it takes to survive. So to run, to fight, to flee, of course, in the modern world. What that means is that the part of the brain that is responsible for empathy, which is the prefrontal cortex, which is a cognitive part of the brain, is no longer being fed energy, as it were. You don't need it right now. You're trying to survive. So, of course, the more connected we are to the media and to the perils and the stress and the sadness of the world all around us, when you build onto that, economic decline and political pressure and all of the other things going on in our world, it is actually physiologically, neurologically harder to use those empathy skills because the body is deprioritizing them. So you're right. It does feel like it should be more, except that because we're all so stressed, again, according to the data, we have 380 million people suffering with anxiety or depression, right? Nearly 400 million people. Because of the stress and the pressure that we're living under, the more likely we are to retreat to right? Again, evolutionary, go back to what looks and feels like me because that feels safe, right? And number two, because our bodies are under this constant cortisol-driven, high-stress reality, that the part of the brain that we need to actually be able to think about how somebody else is experiencing this reality is turned off.
Yeah. And that's the core, I'm sure you've seen in your work, right? The whole thing about burnout, which is so tough. It's just that when you are so flooded with the hormones and all of that, right? Your prefrontal cortex shuts down and it's like, no, 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 you're in danger. And so all of the rational thinking and all of that goes by the wayside. So it's interesting. I wonder if it's as much as we can see what other people are doing, and that should give us a better sense of what the world is like, I think it's created, right? The phones and technology, it's created all of this added pressure that it sounds like what you're saying is like, and that added pressure is preventing us just biologically from having the bandwidth to be able to sit down with your new report and empathy. You know what I mean? It's simple. I know that sounds a little too simplistic, but it's true.
No,
It's like
I totally agree. I think you're right. It's bandwidth, and it's also just value, right? Intention. Because people always say to me, how do you have time to do everything you do? And I always say to them, because time is a direct translation or reflection of where you place value, right? So to meet with you today in this time zone, I had to get up very early in the morning, right? That's my choice to start my day probably 2 hours earlier because I want to meet you, right? So I plan my life around that. If you don't place value on understanding others, and often that is because you are burnt out or exhausted or just overstimulated or a million other things, then you're not going to do it. Because this is a skill set, the skill set of being able to understand another, you have to practice it, because practice creates permanence. You can only use skills that you have. And if you don't practice them, you don't have them. So it's a bit of a cycle, Tess, which is why I'm always so grateful to meet people like you that are so open about these conversations, because the first stage to changing that, and as you said, it is changing, is awareness. So conversations like this, they really matter.
Well, and I think another big thing that people get quote unquote wrong about empathy is it's not agreement.
No.
It's very funny where people feel like, and I just had a thing with someone today where absolutely, like, I could empathize from his point of view. He and I do not agree at all. We have different opinions. Can I see it? Yeah, I can. Is it, but then what happens is then it becomes about, well, what are my values versus this person's values, and how do they perceive this particular issue and situation? And I think that's the other part of it too, is that him disagreeing with me or him having a different impression, it also isn't, he's not against me. This isn't a battle. Like, this is just, you can be empathetic and say, I can see how you got there, but I still don't agree with it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's such an important point, because empathy is not about agreement, but it's also not about judgment, right? So whether I like it or not. And you're right. You can say to someone, I hate what you're saying, but I do understand it. Like, I know why you think that. I just know that you think it, right? And that's absolutely fine. People always think that conflict is a very negative thing, and the media has created that over decades, right? Conflict, this big, negative, awful word. But actually, conflict leads to all kinds of amazing things, because if we never conflicted, how would we ever grow? How would we innovate? How would we change perspectives or invent new things? We couldn't, right? If we just all agreed all the time. So empathy absolutely can be found and used in conflict. It's incredibly powerful at overcoming conflict. And, I often think, Tess, about one of the hardest conversations I ever had. So I was on a meet at Zoom like this, but I was training the counter-terrorism unit of the Metropolitan Police Force of London, so in England.
Wow.
And we did this webinar, and then we had the Q&A. And in hindsight, I totally should have prepared for this question, but I didn't. Because in the Q&A, one of the first questions was, but Mimi, can I empathize with a terrorist who has just blown up a building or a bridge? And I was like, right, that's a really big question. But of course, the answer is yes, right? Yeah. Are you going to agree with it? Well, no, right? Are you going to like it? Obviously not. They just blew something up, right? But if you study that person from birth to today and look at why they did what they did, what were they told, what were they following, what do they believe in, what were the pressures, what were the lessons for perhaps like 20 years, understand why that person did it.
Yeah.
So it's difficult to have these conversations, but empathy is a skill set that's built into the FBI in terms of the behavioral change stairway, so how they do hostage negotiations. It's a skill set in the US Army handbook. So for soldiers to go to war, they have to learn empathy, right? They're not teaching them that because it's nice, right? They're not going to war to lose. They're going to war to win. They're teaching them the skills that they believe will lead to winning. So yeah, it definitely needs a rebrand.
Yes. Well, and I think that, and I don't know, do you get a lot of resistance from people that do feel, because, well, let me back up for a second, because I want to ask you about the generations. Because I'm very curious of what you're seeing with the organizations that you're working with. Are you seeing a pattern of younger people coming in? Because what I see a lot of is younger people coming into the workforce and assuming and demanding and wanting, right? Because empathy was something that was like, no, there's no empathy in the workplace. We should be having that. And now, okay, no, we do need this. Wait a second, let's think about this differently. And now we have this generation coming in who are very much like, yeah, this is what I need. Is that what you're seeing as well? And then there's the tension with the older people that are like, I never got empathy. No one held my hand, so why should I hold yours? But that's one of the biggest things that I've had with the generations is getting people to empathize, to like put themselves in the shoe of a 22-year-old who just graduated from college. AI's everywhere, right? Like, that part of it.
And again, wanting to place the value on that, right? Because there is, especially, I would say, especially for men, but that's mainly because there are just more men in the oldest generation in the workplace. Been in the workplace for longer, especially for the men that I work with that have been in work for over 30 years. There is, as you said, there is a low intention to wanting to understand why I must do that, because nobody did it for me, right? So when I went to work, nobody cared what I thought or who I was or how I wanted to work, because you did it like this and you did it or you didn't do it. You either kept your job or you didn't, right? So you are trying, that phrase when we say teaching old dogs new tricks, right? It's a little bit of that. You are saying, yes, but the skills that got you here won't keep you here anymore because the world has changed so much. So I think, of course, there are many phenomenal people at the top of businesses that do want to understand these skills, but there is a resistance. And I think a lot of that, back to psychology and just state of human race, is because people are extremely stressed and extremely busy, right? Don't tell me I need to learn something else on top of the amount of things I've had to learn in the last 5, 10, 15 years, right? From technology to well-being to inclusion to all the other hundreds of things that leaders have had to adapt in the last few years. So I think one of the bigger challenges is, though, like you're talking about the young ones coming in, they also need a lot of reminding. So often when I have an audience, which is everybody, right, top to bottom, I will smile at them and I will say to the young people, I will say, anyone in the room that is under 25, please note, this is also for you. You have to understand them. It is not all about them you, right? This has to be reciprocal. So I often say to them, if you have a boss, right, or a leader who doesn't want to send emojis on WhatsApp, don't send, right? You have to understand that your way is not the only way, in the same way that they have to understand perhaps the previous ways are also not the only way. So understanding has to be a shared reality. And I think whatever generation you're in, people need reminding of that, because it's an intentional skill set. You have to take time, you have to take effort to invest into it. I think the one thing that I would say about the younger generations coming in is that, as you touched on, they have an expectation to be understood. Perhaps some of the older generations had an acceptance of not being understood. Yes. So they're coming from a different mind space in that way. And until they learn to communicate better, they will continue to hit in the middle. Because what older, not old, but older generations believe is one thing is another, right? So often you'll hear the kind of Gen X or the older millennials say, oh, but they're so lazy. Those young people, they'll say, no, that's not laziness, right? That's just me showing passion for multiple talents, or that's because I want to use different media platforms to communicate, or, different things. But it's not laziness, it's just difference. So yeah, we have a communication problem, but that's probably not that new. That's probably been there in every generation.
No, and that's the other part that's very funny, right? Is that we live in a world now where everyone has a platform. So all of these things are being talked about, and there's so many blogs, and people have to come up with articles and podcasts, right? There's just a lot more content in the world that we live in today. And what's so hard for I think both sides really, but I think especially the older generations, is really being able to how do I say this? I think what's hard for people is you cannot empathize with someone and go, yeah, I would do it this way. I can't. When you're 50 some odd years old, I'm going to be 53 next week. So it's a little bit like when I put myself in the space of a 22-year-old, I don't think about myself as a 53-year-old in this situation. Like, that's the other piece I feel people miss too when it comes to aging, the ages, right? Which is, okay, now you need to think about like, how did you see the world at 22? Like, were things messy for you? Did you, all of that? And when I look back at who I was at that age, I'm like, oh yeah, I would have had this perception.
Yes.
I'm just curious if you feel like, do you feel like people really, to truly understand someone, do you feel like you absolutely have to put yourself in that headspace?
No, I don't.
Of that age, no.
You just have to be able to listen really well. I mean, the backbone of empathy, of empathetic leadership or organizational empathy, is what I would call listening-led leadership, right? The ability to listen to others, because as we said, you don't have to agree, you don't have to like it, you just have to understand it. So empathy as a cognitive reality is based on similar skills as the imagination, right? So you can say, I don't know what it's like to see the world through your lens, right? But I can imagine that this feels intimidating, or this feels stressful, or any of those things, right? So there's a little bit of, I guess, projection there. The key is you have to be able to listen well and ask questions in order to get it right. Because of that reality, the enemy of all performance, actually, of progress, is assumption, right? So if I'm assuming you feel or want or believe X, but actually it's Y, we're not going to get very far, right, together. So, a lot of these skill sets, again, they take time, they take practice, they take intention. I don't have to know what it's like to be, let's say, I do a lot of work in the Gulf, right? So I work in Saudi Arabia, for example, often, most months. I don't know what it's like to be a 22-year-old Saudi Arabian person who grew up in an Islamic family in that reality. I don't know, because when I was 22, I was in the UK, and it was a very different world from Saudi Arabia, right? That doesn't mean that I can't now learn to understand, right? Yeah. To understand, I see, this is really important to you. Interestingly, this is really important to me. Those are quite similar, right? Because in the end, as human beings, we are all more alike than we are different. So most of the drivers of behavior are exactly the same. It doesn't matter if you believe in this political party or this faith or this outlook or this set of values, because as humans, we're more alike than we are different. So you don't have to know what it's like. You just have to want to understand.
Yeah, I love that. You have to want to understand. And I think that's the piece that is so important, because simply saying to someone, and you said this earlier, which is, no, I don't know what that's like. Please tell me. Or no, I don't, just things that simple. I think the resistance that I see a lot of especially with managers, is there's this feeling of they hear the word empathy and then they think, oh God, this is about feelings. This is about therapy. This is about this. This is not my job. And I'm like, whoa, let's backtrack a little bit. Because I've written articles about, that I think that leadership, like your number one skill is empathy as a leader. You need empathy more than you actually need to know how to do the job. To be honest, do you know what I mean? Like the technical parts of the job. Yes. So because being with other humans at the core, it's about that empathy. But I've experienced a lot of people but that fear. And it's not like they're going, no, no, no. It's just a little bit of, am I going to say something wrong? Like, if I empathize, am I going to open up Pandora's box? It's like, no. But
and
there's still that feel.
Right, Tess? I don't know if you know this. Do I have time? People always ask me, I don't have time. Right, Mimi, I don't have it. Do you hear that as well?
Yes. And the belief is, if I ask, my direct report told me their dog died over the weekend, but if I ask a follow-up question, I'm so worried about the time.
Yeah.
Right. And where will that go? And will it take us to a place? And then will I be able to bring them back? And that, I think for some people, being in that space is easier, right? To be there and kind of navigate these things, and you kind of know how to get things back on track and let's get back to work. But there are many, many people that get very scared that they are going to do or say something that will, I don't know what they think is going to happen, but feelings are scary for some people.
I think for most people, actually. Yes. And one insight that I was in the US just a few weeks ago on a small tour. So I did actually all corners. It was a lot of flying. And one of the things that I sort of found, I guess, as an insight in the US, as somebody from outside the US, is your point there around the fear of saying something wrong. I think as an outsider, right, as a non-American, I think that leads a lot of your culture more than any other country that I have been to. And I go to about 30 a year. I fly around 100 flights a year.
Wow.
Right? There is something very American, again, from an outsider that I can see as a non-American, this is a very heavy fear in America, that what if I say something wrong? What if I use the wrong term or say the wrong thing or make the wrong assumption? So there is, I think, Tess, as you touched on, a fear that if I understand I might do the wrong thing with it, so then it's easier to retreat and not get involved. And that is sad, but it's also a problem, right? It's sad, but it's also, as I said earlier, a barrier to performance. You mentioned that you say to leaders, your number one skill is empathy. That is more important the more senior you are. If you can't understand people, you cannot lead them. It is that simple.
Yes. So I want to ask a little bit about the work that you do, if you don't mind. So are you, because it sounds fascinating, traveling around. I didn't realize that you do all this traveling. So are you going into various companies and just doing consulting? Are you giving keynotes? It sounds like you're also actually in there working with senior leaders, like getting in there and helping them. How do you work with people?
Most of my work is in speaking.
Okay.
Well, I would say in speaking and in, let's say, content creation, right? And when I say content, that could be a workshop, a masterclass, a podcast, an article, appearances, I don't know, on the media, content that I create on Instagram, any piece of content that helps people understand what the skill set is, right? So that is what I do 7 days a week, 52 weeks a year, every minute of every day from like 5 a.m. to midnight, is find different ways of communicating with people about what this skill set is. And I believe that there are 4 stages or 4 steps really to be able to create that change. As I said earlier, the first is awareness. And I would say most of my time, probably 70 or 80% of my time, is only on that. That's why I position myself as an empathy advocate, because I advocate for this skill set to help the world understand. I can't, unfortunately, enforce it, right? I can't stay in people's businesses and make sure they're empathetic, or that make sure a leader is more empathetic to his team, or a husband is more empathetic to his wife, or a mother is more empathetic to her child, right? Unfortunately, there's not enough hours in the day to do that. But after that awareness, the next stages of that change, so you would have awareness, you would then have to have some form of education. So people need to really have that information. Then you need intention, and only then can you create measurement or systems for change. My work, Tess, is in the awareness phase. So yes, I do spend, particularly in Asia, more time with leaders, working with them to look at what does that mean. But I don't do consulting, and I'm not a coach. People are always like, can you coach me? I say, no, I can't. So yeah, that's most of my work, and just being able to have these conversations and really, I guess, help people understand, as I said earlier, why what you think this is.
Yes.
Actually not what it is.
Do you have any, I'm curious of, there's any people that you follow, excuse me, like the person that always, when I think about empathy, I always go to Brene Brown, right? Just the way people think about her in terms of vulnerability. Do you have people, what do you read? Who do you follow that you feel like, they get it?
Yeah, like I think it is hard, actually. It's so funny you asked me that, because weirdly, people don't ask me that often. But yesterday someone did. And she went a little further and she said, who do you follow? And she said, and who is your mentor or guide or, coaches you or any of these things? And I said to her, well, no one. She said, well, that's a bit sad, isn't it? Because it is quite hard, because this is quite a new conversation. Because I guess in many ways, I'm not saying I started this conversation. There's a handful, but really only a handful of us in the world. Brené is one of them, although she doesn't talk about it so much anymore.
Yes,
she obviously has shifted a little bit. But there are various leaders that believe in these similar facets. So Satya Nadella, who is the CEO of Microsoft, is a very big believer in strategic empathy and organizational empathy, not just from a leadership point of view, but innovation, product development, all kinds of things. So I'm always interested in what he has to say. The lady, her name escapes me for one moment, but the CEO of Chanel, she is a huge believer in how to use empathy in leadership. She often talks about knowing the names of every one of her staff at Chanel, or at least trying. Layla Nair, I think her name is. So she's just phenomenal. People are always sending me her videos and saying, did you see she spoke about empathy? In academia, there's a gentleman named Jamil Zaki. He has been talking and writing about empathy for longer than anybody else. So there are a handful, Tess, of really interesting people who are running big enterprises. The CEO of Whole Foods is another one, who really go out of their way to prove that this is a technical business building reality and not just something that you read about in Harvard Business Review. So there are some really good action-driven existing CEOs, people running Chanel and Microsoft, who are really worth listening to and just hearing their opinions, because they're proving it every day. So it's not, just at a keynote speech on a stage at, some HR conference. It is actually happening in workplaces. So
that's very encouraging. And you're right, because it shouldn't be just other coaches and other people just, talking about these things randomly. And right, what you're really talking about is, okay, yeah, this is all well and good, but how do you make it effective? How do you put it into practice every single day of your life and really lead by this with this example, which is a different set of skills. And the other thing too with it is that it requires, it's so interesting because you were talking earlier about change and the stages of change. And that's what's hard is that, right, when we start to see the change for someone, when they start thinking about the change long before we actually ever witness the change. And I think that's another big one too that is important. And I say that because, like with the work that you're doing, it's like you need to just hear it over and over and over again. You need to okay, yes. And then that takes a little bit of time. And then you're like, okay, I think I'm on board now. And so it is hard when you're trying to you kind of have two jobs, right? You're trying to get people to get on board. And then you're sort of like, okay, now this is how I can help you.
Yeah. And it's like you said, it's repetition. But that's the same with, I mean, if you think of bringing up children, right, when they're very, very little, and you're, for example, teaching them to say please and thank you when they're very small every day, like 10 times a day. What do you say? Say please to daddy, say please to mummy, say thank you to the lady, over and over and over again, until they have practiced enough for that skill, like I said at the very beginning, to become permanent. Practice creates permanence and not perfection. And I think that's really important, Tess, because we talk in the English language about practice makes perfect. But the reality is the gap between expectation and reality is disappointment. So if you don't want to live in disappointment for the rest of your life, stop aiming to be perfect and just aim for progress, right? Aim to practice these skills. Aim to, for example, use people's names more often, right? One of the greatest ways to build more empathy into your behavior and your relationships is to use people's names. So if you watch this show back, you will see that throughout I have said Tess. I've said Tess, I really agree, or Tess, I don't think that's the case. That is now it's a habit, but it's also an intentional decision. Because when you use people's names, you create connection. It's their name, right? It is the first gift they've ever given. Use it. Eye contact would be another, right? People find it quite hard because we love our phones and we're very used to looking at them. But making eye contact is a physiological, evolutionary sign for safety. So if you want someone to know, your wife, your daughter, that you are interested in their day, you have to make eye contact with them. So, and there's various. I actually wrote a new book. It's here. This is not because it's promotion, but because I just got it in the post. You can't see it. But they just sent me this, like the proof. This is just like a test copy.
So ways to connect with
40 ways to connect with people.
Oh,
so it comes out in December. I'm so excited because you know when you write books and they send it to you, you're like, I made it on a laptop. Now it's a thing. But I wrote it to put 40 ways in a very tiny little book to help people connect and say, listen, this is not I mean, it is a science, but you don't have to take the science, right? Just do a handful of things. Make better eye contact, ask more questions, pause when people are finished, use their names, things you can use with an Uber driver or the CEO, right? Little things that you can do to show interest, to show presence, to show value, that you value what that person's saying. And most of those things can be done in under 120 seconds. So for all of the leaders that say, that sounds nice, but I don't have time, you do, because you have 120 seconds.
But, right. And we need to wrap up. So I don't mean to open up a can of worms, but I think that then goes back to, right, to be a good leader, there has to be a lot of self-awareness. There has to be that understanding of, because I think that's that other piece of, right, you're, from what I'm understanding you're saying, it's yes, you practicing these skills on a daily basis. Yes, that may take a little bit of time or bandwidth, but what it will give you back is, there's a big ROI, right, on being able to spend that time and invest. It's so funny when you mentioned the name thing, because I always notice that when people do it, and it's so funny because I never do it, not because I want to be empathetic, but I've always found it to be kind of like, I don't know, it's just some things. I think that another thing that's important is we need to do the things that feel right to us, that feel comfortable. Yes. Do you know what I mean? That's the other part of it too. It's like, I think there's this real idea that oh God, empathy, and then I got to do this, and then this is what it looks like. Oh God, I got to say people's names every 3 minutes. It's like, no, if that's not you, if it's not you, then that's not you. But you, of the 40 things, you can find one that you can do. Sure. It's not as hard as you think.
And they're very easy. And that, you asked me, and I know we have to finish, but you asked me earlier about resistance, right? Is there a lot of resistance? And the answer is actually no. What normally happens in like the coffee break of these workshops I do or whatever, and I say normally because like 90% of them by the coffee break, someone, normally a man, but someone will come to me and say, hey, Mimi, I have to tell you something. I say, yeah, you know what? They say, I just realized I haven't listened to anyone in my whole life. I say, don't worry, you're not alone, right?
No.
So for most people, this is just a realization. And to your point, you have to do what's authentic, because fake empathy is worse than any empathy. If you don't want to use people's names, don't do that, right?
Yeah.
But find ways in your reality, in your relationships, within your approach. You know, even if you are a very serious, scientific-led leader, right? I'm not asking you to be like chirpy and kind, right? But find ways to make eye contact, to show presence, to be interested, to ask questions that are comfortable to you, that show value to the other person. So I think you're right. We're not asking you to do things that are off-brand for you, right? And are uncomfortable, but just find things that show an interest, a value in the other person's reality and humanity, and it will build your business as well as your relationship.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. This was really fascinating. I love that this is what you're doing. I love to hear stories about how I love to hear about, you know, leaders that are all for this and want this. I love hearing stories that you going into organizations and people are like, yes, I want this. Because it really is the first step. You know, it's where we all have to begin. And I believe that empathy will be like one of the number one skills that you'll need in the workforce moving forward. Like everyone's so focused on AI, and you got to understand AI for sure, you know, obviously, but at the end of the day, empathy it's a superpower. If you can really use it, it will help you gain influence. It will help you connect, and people will like you more. You will become more likable, and it's at the core because, you know, we all just want to be seen and heard. That's all we want.
You and I should travel the world together, Tess. We can do it together. I love that. I love that conclusion. I'm like sitting here like, yes, that exactly. Right. So thank you. I'm so happy to hear you say it. To know that
it's exciting.
So I'm super grateful. It was really fun. Thank you for having me.
So tell us, is there anything, we'll have everything in the show notes, but is when's the book dropping? Do you know yet, or?
Yes, so this book, 40 Ways to Connect with People, will be out in August.
Okay.
So 2 months, right? 2 months. My website, if people want to come and find me, is www.empathyeverywhere.co. And every 2 weeks, I send empathy letters, which are definitely not a newsletter, a little bit more like a pen pal letter, which about 12,000 people are reading now. And you can find them at empathyletters.com. So if anyone would
I'm going to have to check that out.
About empathy, empathyletters.com. So yeah, that's what I'm doing.
Yeah, no, that's exciting. Sorry, I didn't mean to step on that. So empathyletters.com.
Exactly. Yeah.
I'm going to write that down because that sounds really interesting, because we get so many newsletters. So I'm very curious of like what.
I just felt the world couldn't find space for another newsletter.
Oh yeah, I know. And I have a newsletter, and it's every time I'm always feeling like, oh, I'll just, you know, there you go. But you want to share things with people. It's so hard. Like, how else do I share this? I know. Yes. Anyway, thank you so much for being here. And thank you to everyone for listening to the Gen Mess with Tess. Remember, we're not just fixing the mess, we're learning how to live in it. Stay curious, be kind to yourself, and I'll see you all next time.
You've been listening to the Gen Mess with Tess with your host, Tess Brigham. Make sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and make sure to follow Tess Brigham on all social channels. To learn more about Tess's books, courses, or to have Tess speak to help clean up the Gen Mess at your organization, head on over to tessbrigham.com. Thanks for listening.